Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to course number 5 of psychological assessment. What I'm going to do today is share with you a completed Rorschach um, scoring summary with associated interpretive report. So basically, here's where we are now. Last class, we spent a good deal of time, and in the readings, you spend a good deal of time addressing how the Rorschach is scored, what you look for scoring, particularly using the Exner system. And what I'm going to do now, you will notice that in your book at the end, Appendix 4, Appendix 5, and Appendix 6 are the associated scoring worksheets and scoring summaries, and they're extremely complex. What I'm going to do is share with you one that's been completed, and then we will discuss what the different scores mean, how you go about interpreting the results. Now, before I share with you this scoring summary, there's a couple things. One is I am not sharing with you the responses. What I'm sharing with you is the scoring based on a certain set of responses. We can talk during the class and during discussion about what some examples of different responses might be, similar to what we did last class. But I want to show you at least what the scoring summary looks like, just so you have some exposure to that in the Exner system. The second thing I wanted to bring up is what I'm about to share with you is a computer-generated scoring response. So it is actually going to be a mixture of Exner and one or two other systems, scoring systems. It's primarily Exner, but there will be some scores on there that you may not recognize. That's just how scoring works these days. Any of the scoring programs that you might use will typically not be just one scoring system. They will be a combination of scoring systems. And as we go along, I will try to give you as many examples as I can so you have a practical understanding of what this would mean. But maybe as a way, maybe rather than try to explain it so much, let me, if you will excuse me 1 second here. Okay, I'm going to, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and here's what I'm going to share here. Okay, so you will see what I'm sharing with you is an interpretive report of the Rorschach system. And what I'm going to go through, now there's not much put here about this person. This is a 35-year-old individual. I'm going to assume this individual is a male. Gender is not specifically listed here, but it's listed as Mr. C. A 35-year-old male who has 16 years of education, which means a college degree in most cases, and is married. Born in 1968, and this you will see this system has not changed much, even though it's almost 20 years old. But this is very similar to the computer system, even that's used today. Okay, so in the interpretive, I want to show you where some of the things you're seeing in the Exner system in the book, how you can follow along with what the system ends up being. So let's move down here. So where we start with is this, it's called the sequence of scores here, but where what this actually ends up being is the results of the results of the sequence of responses. That is the second part of Appendix 6 of your book. So what you see here is you have all of the, for each card, that's how all 10 cards are, the scores for each of the responses. Now, I think what you may notice here is on some of them, the person was allowed to give just one response, but for most of them, there are 2 or 3. Now, notice here, what's been listed for each card is the location and determinant. Notice how all of these look like what we have been talking about for each of the items, the location, the determinant, the content, popular score, and then there are things called special scores. But notice here how, take for the part, notice for the location, what is put up there is that the location was a whole. So for the first one, the location that we used was the whole card. Notice how, and we talked about that last time. And then SO after that stands for the other part of the location, which would be the type of space that is used there. And then notice next door to it, the determinant and form quality, and then the content, and then the, hold on one second here. I'm just making sure this is all recording correctly. Okay. And then the form, so notice how if you look in chapter 4, chapter 3 and chapter 4, you can see all the different types of scores that we're finding here. So for the location, you have the whole, and then you have the notice the DD and the DO and the common detail and the unusual detail. So this stands for DD, stands for unusual. Notice how S here is when space is used. These are all things we talked about last week. I'm just pointing out where you find them here. And then if you look in there, there's more detail about how the location and developmental quality is used. So I'm looking here at page 42 of the book, just to point out where some of these things are. So W means the person. So for this first card, the first response was one that not only used the whole area, but also used the space. And the thing about the space is never scored alone. If you look in table 3.1 of the book, you'll see that it says there, space is never scored alone. It is always scored either as part of the whole or part of the common or unusual detail response. And then again, this O, okay, now keep in mind the thing about this O that you're seeing here. This O would mean that O stands for ordinary. So in this case, it is a whole response where space was also used, and based on the Exner system, it is considered an ordinary response. Excuse me, I hit the wrong button there. So it is considered to be an ordinary response. And so that's what, and now you wouldn't know the ordinary unless you have the full Exner system with you. So if you have the full text, if you're using the computer system, you would see that this would be, so this is a whole response with the space being incorporated, and is considered to be an ordinary response for using the whole card. Okay, now the second response is notice DO. So it is a common detail. It is an ordinary detail. How do we know it's an ordinary detail? The D stands for detail. So the detail, what this means is that there is there is a detail used for the response, and then the O means that it is an ordinary one that is used. And like I said, you would need the whole Exner system to know if it is ordinary or not. But some typical rules you can see on page 45, some typical rules that are usually criteria for saying if it is an ordinary response. It's two objects are described with no meaningful relationship between them. And you can see on most of the cards that they are, most of them look like, for most people on the cards, it looks like there are two objects. Or a single object is found that the research shows is a common detail to use for that particular card. So ordinary, detail, and then here you have DD, which is a unusual detail, and then S also with space. Notice again, space is never used alone. So interpreting it, space is never used alone. And then the DD is, like I said, an unusual response. And then this plus sign, the plus sign means that that the plus sign means that there is acceptable synthesis between the. In other words, if you look at the cards, you will notice that there is that most of them look like, or many of them look like, there are two objects. And if you just present them as being two objects, even if they're not interacting, there is a sense that your response has a sense that you are recognizing that there are two objects that are there, even if they are not, even if it's not a meaningful interaction between them. I'm going to stop sharing just to give you an example. So what I'm talking about here, this is the second card. Okay, and this is what I mean. Notice how it would be very typical for someone to see two objects here. Now they may say that they're interacting with each other, and that would be the synthesized response. That's what the plus sign means. Now, what the other part, when something is considered synthesized, that means that there's a recognition that there are two objects or two people or two of the same thing, and that they are interacting with each other. The ordinary response, remember I said that that an ordinary response would mean no meaningful relationship. A meaningful relationship, or some sort of relationship, would be not that these are two people clapping hands, but that this is a brother and sister, two co-workers, a man and a wife. That it would be unusual to interpret these two individuals as necessarily being two people have a meaningful relationship between each other. So to interpret it as two people would be a synthesized response, two people interacting. Identifying it as two people with a certain relationship, brother, sister, mother, child, spouses, that would be unusual. That would be an ordinary response. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing the interpretive response. Okay. So now a response that is not ordinary does not mean that it's bad. It just means that it's a bit more meaningful. It means it's interpretable. Okay. And then, so we go down here and you can see all the ones we talked about before. And if you look on, like I said, table 3.2, you can see what some of these other ones, vague response, plus means a synthesized response again, as a synthesized related through position or movement. Okay. And then V is when the response is more vague. Okay, and then we'll move over here to determinant. So determinant, notice we talked about this before. F means using only the form or the shape, which would be what we're seeing here. And again, going back to ordinary response, D here, FD, meaning if you look on table 3.3, you can see what all these means. So it gets real complicated because FD means if you read, FD means responses using three-dimensionality based only on the form. So in other words, if for somehow the person gives a response that somehow suggests that they're saying something in 3D based only on the form of the card, then that's where FD. And the example they give in the book here is, for instance, if the individual describes seeing a dog in front of or behind a tree. So it gives you a sense of what you're looking for here. I mean, you're really delving into trying to gather what the person is experiencing when they see the card, because you're getting as detailed as trying to. So if the person describes something in front of or something behind something, that's an indication that they are seeing the whole thing in 3D, in 3 dimensions, based on what they see in the card. And you can tell, so that kind of gives you a sense of how much you're delving into, why you're spending so much time with trying to gather good sense of how the person saw what they saw. Because you're trying to see, okay, are they seeing things in 3D? Are they seeing movement? There's the M for movement. Is what they're seeing, are they using the shading to see anything in particular? Are they seeing animal movement? Where's the color being used? Notice here you've got color, FC, form color. So FC is when, I notice the difference there. You've got FC and CF. F is when form is primary but color is secondary, and CF is when color is primary and form is secondary. FD down here, and if you go to your book here, you see again, I already said FD. FD is 3-dimension. Okay, and then we move over to content, and content is in your book, table 3.6. And you can see there's a whole bunch of them here. I mean, BT is botany, plant life. So here, so you're already starting to see here the the person saw some sort of plant life based on an ordinary response using or based on the form, but some ordinary let me go back here. So they saw some sort of plant life using the whole picture with the space included, and then next they saw, if you go here, you see that what they saw was they primarily saw something based on the form, but with 3 dimensions. So they saw dimensionality. So hold on one second. I don't have, as I said, I don't have the responses, but you can sort of picture what this probably meant. So here's the card that referred to. So what they're saying is they saw some sort of plant life. They saw some sort of plant life, taking into account this and this, using just whole form in sort of like dimensionality. So you can almost see that they maybe saw some sort of plant coming out of this picture, and the so maybe some sort of tree that they could see, because they saw this as maybe being the ground and then the plant coming out. I'm just guessing, but that's kind of what we're looking at here. That's kind of what all those pictures meant, or all those responses meant there. All right, let's get back to so here we go. Okay, so all right, and there's everything we have. I mean, you can go through again, I'm just walking you through everything, but hopefully by now you're starting to see everything. I mean, here's everything. The location, the determinant and form quality, all the initials we talked about, all the initials that are in the chart, the Z-score that we talked about, and then here's where it identifies things as being a popular or not popular response. Remember, I was telling you before that what you do here is you this is based on the research about whether something is considered to be a popular response, like I said, based on the research. And so you would just use again, the Exner system to tell if it's a popular response or not. The Z-scores we talked about, again, that's from the Exner system. I guess we didn't talk about that, but in the book, just about there are certain Z-scores that are attached based on the research that's been done. What a Z-score represents is a Z-score is the Z-score is the degree to which, basically it's a measure to which the person's score makes sense. And there are certain responses that there are certain responses that have higher Z-scores based on the research, and they don't all. Usually, there are some of the more popular responses. Notice how both of the popular responses have a Z-score, and it's basically a degree to which all of the factors make sense. All of them combined is the type of approach people typically take to these responses. The higher the score, the more it's an approach used by the majority of people. Also, regarding location number, that's also in the Exner system that identifies particular areas that are used for the responses. Now, special scores we didn't talk about at all, but they are also in your book, page 58, 59. They are just reflective of different types of information. You can see them in table 3.7. DV would be unusual verbalization. So this wouldn't be necessarily, this is a score based to a large degree not on what the person said in terms of where they saw their response, but how they verbalized it, how they said things. And by the way, just so you know, I am going to include this report in your materials for reading this week, so you can go through this in more detail. But as you can see in there, there's deviant verbalizations, PSV, no, I'm sorry, the PER would be personalized answer. This again, a number of these special scores had to do with not what the person said, but how they said it. Using unusual words would be DV. Personalized, making the answers particularly personal in terms of referring to, you know, not just personalized, maybe something like not the picture doesn't just show a brother and sister, but shows my brother and sister. So again, on table 3.7, you can see all of those. Okay, so that's the sequence of scores. And then we go down to the structural summary, and you can see that now that is in the appendix. That starts out the appendix 6, the scoring summary, the structural summary. So this and this are from appendix 6 of your book. So, and there's all the, and you can look through there, all the different scores. You know, these are how often the different location features come up, the number of times the different determinant quality comes up, number of form. So these are all how often these different ones come up. And then what you do is basically for the Exner system, there's all sorts of scores that you calculate, and that's all in chapter 4. But there's all sorts of scores that you get here. Now, these are all calculated. You can do them by hand, but you can do them by computer program as well. But they're all meant to get you here. And this and well, they go, but this is where you are really looking to get. These are the constellation tables, and this is really where you start to figure out how to where you really get to the process of interpreting what you've got. So this, and then notice how the constellations that are talked about in chapter 5 are I'm sorry, no, chapter hold on a second, I have the wrong chapter. I apologize here. I pulled up the wrong chapter. Yeah, chapter 5, principles of interpretation. So notice here you've got the 7 clusters. Okay. Now here are the constellations that are also talked about in your book. And these are just, so notice all you're doing here with these is, so for instance, for the suicide constellation, and there are other ones here. The suicide ones we talked about mainly in chapter 5, but there are other ones. But just since this is the one primarily talked about in the book. Notice what it is. It can be rough up, but notice all it is it goes, if you look through chapters 3, 4, and 5, you'll notice, as complicated as it can be, all this is you take these numbers, okay, and from them you develop these variables. All these variables are, you know, for instance, how many items, how many times did the following types of content come up? And here is, how many times did certain types of form calling come up? Those are all used for each of these variables. Each of these variables are calculated based on the numbers up here. And then in order to determine if these constellations are met, there's a bunch of criteria that are used based on these variables. So you calculate these variables based on these numbers, and then you determine if you have enough for each of these constellations. So for instance, with the suicide constellation, okay, look up here. It's for the suicide constellation, you look for things like whether FV, okay, FV. You look up here for whether FV. So what this means, okay, here's the suicide. Oh, great. Here's suicide. I forgot about this. Here's suicide conflict, right? So the suicide constellation is FV. So I look for FV plus VF1 plus 0 plus V. V is also 0. So 1 plus 0 plus 0 plus FD1 is greater than 2. So you've got FV is 1, VF, I'm sorry, VF is 0. So 1 plus 0 plus V is also 0, plus FD is 1. Now, this is notice how this is marked. That's because this is supposed to be greater than or equal to 2. So we know, because it is 2, so it's equal to 2. And then we also, so that's just an example of how you do it. You find out here if each of these scores are, if added together, they are greater than or equal to 2. And we found out that they are equal to 2. So that's where we just move forward and mark that. And as it says down here for the suicide constellation, if you have 8 or more of those constellations, then, or of those criteria, then it means that that you have met the criteria for that constellation. And in this case, it would mean that there's a high degree of suicide potential with this individual. Now, in this case, there were only 7 of the criteria met. So that was not determined to be, this person would not be considered to be suicidal because there are 7 and not 8 of the constellations. However, perceptual thinking index, so some difficulties, this person met all of the ones for the perceptual thinking. That means there's some evidence of there being difficulties with the person's perceptual thinking. Down here, so let's see what other constellation they didn't. Hypervigilant. So this would be a person who would show some difficulties with perceptual thinking, and a person who would be considered hypervigilant because they met this constellation as well. Now, okay, so those are all the scores that you tied together. And then you move down here, and if you look here at the interpretive constellations, you see each of the 7 clusters that are talked about in chapter 5. Ideation, it's on the same order, but each of the 7 clusters here. Ideation, information processing. So in the chapter, it starts in our chapter, it starts off in chapter 5, starting on page 118. We have information processing, And then information processing and processing quality, those are all under processing. Cognitive mediation, ideation, capacity for control and tolerance for stress, affect, and self-perception. And then interpersonal perception. Okay, so each of those clusters are here, and then they're each discussed separately in the interpretive report based on what the research shows about those different scores up there. So let's take a look at some of them. So notice how I said that one of the clusters that came up was the perceptual thinking. And notice here that what you have under here in the interpretive report, one of the things is, what would you think somebody who has problems with perceptual thinking might be commonly among schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, delusional disorder, those types of things. And so there's a whole bunch of other things here. Person is capable of thinking in a flexible manner, but it shows possible serious impairment in his ability to think logically and coherently. So they can be flexible, but not necessarily logical. And so that's just some examples of what you pull up from the ideation. Cognitive mediation, those would be variables that provide information about the manner in which this person perceives their environment, whether they see things the way most people do. Information processing, the degree to which the person focuses their attention and how they organize their experiences. Capacity for control and tolerance of stress, that's somewhat self-explanatory. Affect, how the person deals with effective emotional experiences. Self-perception, how the person views themselves. And then there's a cluster of scores for how the person views themselves and then how they view other people. And then here you get to the overview, where everything is kind of taken into account. Consideration should be given to the distinct possibility that this person has a schizophrenia type diagnosis. And notice, this is something I'd really like you to take from this. Notice, as much of a pain in the neck as this can be, notice what you've got here. You've got somebody who comes across as being flexible in their thinking, but also might have schizophrenia. And if you think just about that one example, you get a real sense of what the Rorschach offers with all these scores. A pain in the neck as it can be. But notice, where else would you be able to delve into that complexity? You know, usually schizophrenia is seen as usually you would see someone with schizophrenia as being necessarily unable to function across all areas, but that's not true. I mean, it's true of some people with schizophrenia, severe schizophrenia, but very often somebody could have a type of psychotic disorder, but still able to function in a way that they can come across as flexible, even reasonable in terms of processing new information, but their own beliefs are rather bizarre and unusual. The person appears to have sufficient resources to cope adequately with the demands being imposed on their daily life and able to manage stress. So part of the reason they might have schizophrenia, but people aren't noticing it, is because they're able to manage stress. Remember that schizophrenia is often seen as a disorder of uh, of stress tolerance, of emotion dysregulation. You know, that these psychotic symptoms come up when the person is unable to manage what they're having to deal with. That doesn't seem to be a problem for this person. Uh, reality testing is a problem, but stress management is not a problem. So, look over this report, come up with some of your own questions, and but this is a good guide. It's really complex, the scoring system. But if you look at the end and see what it gives you, you can see why it's often very well worth it. Okay, I will put all this together and put this on the module along with some other readings, and I will see you all on Thursday.